and welcome back to the Vibrant Voice podcast. I am Amber Rose. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we are meeting with Kim Richardson. She is a yoga teacher, and she's going to be talking to us about how it is that she uses her knowledge and skills to teach adults specifically. I'm not going to get too much into it because our chat is going to be pretty in-depth and there's going to be a lot to share here today, but I did want to pass it off to Kim so she could introduce herself to you. Hello, Kim. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Amber. Thank you so much for inviting me to share about my yoga teaching experience. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and just share a little bit that I know from my experience of, just teaching adults and other populations in my community.
Yeah. Feel free to tell us about yourself. How did you get into teaching? Where do you live? All those fun things.
Okay. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm a lifelong, well, originally from Cleveland, Ohio. I always have to claim my Cleveland roots, but I've been living in Birmingham for the last 20 years. I've been practicing yoga for about the last 10 years, and I've been teaching for the last 5 years. So I did my 200-hour certification in 2018 and have since gone on to become a 500-hour yoga teacher and currently enrolled in a yoga therapy training. So fingers crossed, I'll be done in October with my yoga therapy certification to become a certified yoga therapist through IAYT and have various certifications in different styles of yoga from restorative to yin, prenatal and postnatal, originally in vinyasa, aqua yoga, oncology yoga, and I'm a registered children's yoga teacher as well.
That's so impressive.
Been doing a lot.
Yeah. It sounds very well-rounded too. From the different styles of yoga, but then the different ways that you can practice, and then also the different people that you teach.
Yeah, the whole point was really going back to the question about how I got started in yoga. It was really from trying to find my own balance and manage stress as a entrepreneur who owned my own consulting company for the last 16 years and raising a daughter and life in general. And I started practicing yoga just to find some balance. Through my local, I think my first class might have been in a local Y or picking up a DVD at a Walmart or something and practicing at home in my living room. And as I began to sort of wander out into the local community to visit local studios, they didn't really feel like welcoming spaces for a Black woman. And so I ended up coming back home and practicing in my living room on the mat on my living room floor, watching YouTube videos. And so I did that for a long time, but it just began to make me wonder, in a city that's minimally 75% African American, like why couldn't I find a space or why couldn't I just find a Black yoga teacher, a teacher who represented me as a Black woman? And so then I started to think, well, maybe I'm going to have to be the change that I want to see, and maybe it's time to go to teacher training. But my goal from the very beginning was to sort of remove the barriers to yoga and what people think yoga is, that it's all about being super flexible and bendy and putting your foot behind your head and jumping in the headstands and all the things, and just bring yoga to community. So from the very beginning, I've just been wanting to meet people where they are as one of the ways to remove barriers. So teaching in libraries and community rec centers and churches and parks and just wherever people are willing to meet and experience yoga. That's where I've been teaching yoga for the last 5 years.
That's amazing. I can't remember who it was. I know she wasn't the first person to say it, but I'm pretty sure it was Amanda Seales. I remember watching her, one of her reels, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And she was saying that she feels like it's so interesting that, you know, that white people get offended when we create spaces for ourselves, and that she can't understand why, when they're welcomed into every space there is, and there is no space for us to do things, especially doing things that can feel vulnerable or like we're learning something new for the first time or trying something new, in a space where we're not going to be mocked or ridiculed or, pushed away. And that's why we create these spaces where we say, women only or Black only or, yoga teacher or whatever it is, right? That those spaces need to be safe spaces for us to explore and to practice. And to me, it sounds like you're living that exact thing. You're creating those exact spaces.
Yeah, that's been my goal. I mean, we definitely take an inclusive approach where all are welcome, and but we've also done some very intentional things that are BIPOC specific. Like during the pandemic, we did BIPOC specific restorative yoga classes, particularly when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, the murder of George Floyd, the pandemic, all the things that had everyone's nervous system in a wreck. We were like, we need safe spaces, or at least try to cultivate safe spaces, because I don't know that we can ever really promise a safe space, but that we do the best that we can to cultivate safe spaces, because we don't know what people's triggers are.
Yeah.
But to the best of our ability, can work to create spaces that feel welcoming, that feel inclusive, that feel like people can let their guards down. Um, and that those spaces are needed. But I really feel like it's sort of ingrained into the history of this country, like from the beginning of Black people being brought here. It's like the theory was that we were not to be trusted, right? There needed to be this monitoring of Black bodies. And we should not be left to our own devices because it could be threatening. So I think over all of this time, that sort of some of that still sort of bleeds over into current day life of, this questioning of, well, why do people need
What are you
their own
doing back
space?
there? What are you
But
doing
why,
over there?
why do they all sit together in the cafeteria? There's a book on that. Why do all the Black people sit together in the cafeteria? And yeah, it's just the need to be able to let your guard down, to
Feel
connect with people
understood.
that understand you. Yeah,
Yeah.
really important, because if you're asking people to ground, to center, to relax, to do all the things
To
that yoga
close their
asks us to
eyes.
do,
Yeah.
it has to be in a space, right, where you feel like you can do all of those things with the
Yeah.
people who are surrounding you.
Yeah, well, we started the BIPOC program in my yoga studio, or the yoga studio that I attend. There were a lot of questions about why. Why do we need this? Why is this happening? Well, I feel excluded because I can't be a part of that. And one of the things that I kept telling my yoga family was it doesn't need to be either or, right? It doesn't need to be like only this space and only that space. It's that we have all of this space together, but also we have our branches of space, where if we're truly practicing what we're preaching, that this idea of creating a safe space for people who have not felt safe or included, or I think also like considered or valued in those
Mhm.
spaces, that we have to cultivate that smaller space first. And then once that smaller space is created, it can start to expand outwardly to be okay. Well, there's a lot of different ways that we can take it, but right now, because we don't have it, we have to have it, right?
Yeah, and some of the best advice that I got around that, because I was in a training on, cultivating diverse spaces, particularly like being LGBTQIA inclusive.
Mhm.
And you heard that same kind of pushback, like, well, why do we have to be putting up signs? Why do we have to, put a rainbow flag on the door? Why do we have to do all these things? What about my rights as a person if that makes me uncomfortable? And the most profound thing that that person said was that there's 100 other places. If that makes you uncomfortable, there's 100 other places that you can probably go that you are going to feel welcome and feel totally comfortable. But if we cultivate that feels inclusive for this particular segment of our population, there aren't. That might be the only place that that community can go. And so the more that we can gravitate towards like going to the least, those who have the least access, and starting from there, like the more we can do to serve our communities. Because for those who are, cis, white, all of the other things, part of the majority, you have lots of options. If there's a space that you don't feel comfortable in, it's always easy to go someplace else, but that's not always true for everyone else. So it is really important.
That's very well said. That's very well said. The accessibility to spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes back to the accessibility to coaching or teachers as well. I was saying coaching because my last guest, Keisha Jordan, she was talking about when she was looking for mentorship in her particular industry, it took her years to find somebody that she felt like could relate to her, her race, her gender, her disabilities, her learning styles. She's like, where are all the teachers that will actually teach me something? I am having a hard time thinking about, you know being taught by someone that doesn't know anything about my life or my life experience. Like, what actually are you going to teach me that will benefit me? And I think that that's why both you and I have really taken up this mission of being somebody that, um, for all of the things that we are and the experiences that we had, we know that there's somebody out there that's looking for a teacher like us.
Right. Yeah, representation matters because it's like if I can see this woman doing it, this Black woman in a larger body, this older Black woman, it's like all the things, all the reasons that I've been given for why I can't do yoga, I can actually see someone who's doing yoga. So maybe
Right.
that means that I can do yoga too.
That's right. Uh,
Yeah.
I love to hear that. Today we're talking about teaching adults, teaching other adults. And one of I really do love this topic, and I decided to create a whole episode about it because I've been an online coach for the last about 7 years. And I don't work with children, but I'm around children pretty frequently. And one of the things that I was noticing is the different learning styles of children, but then also like how the way that I teach changes between children and adults. And one of the things that I was noticing about teaching adults is, I mean, just we'll get a little bit more in depth on each of these, but the fear of judgment, the fear of not learning quickly enough, the fear of not having it perfect the first time, the resistance that we have to learning new things or trying a new way. And so I wanted to talk to you about this, because you have experience with teaching both children and adults, and I would love, to start off this chat just to, what are some of the things that you notice are differences between teaching children and teaching adults?
That's a great question. Yeah, well, it's I never imagined myself as a children's yoga teacher. Like when I started out teaching, children really aren't on my radar. And it's been interesting because they've become such a large portion of who I teach. I currently work through our arts and medicine program at our local university, and I teach children's yoga in the behavioral health unit at our children's hospital. So I teach 5 classes a week, working with children who have been hospitalized on an inpatient basis for a number of reasons and are admitted to the hospital within the behavioral health unit, as well as the partial hospitalization program. And then we also have a program that we started in our local schools in Birmingham City schools. Um, but as I've been teaching children for the last going on 2 years now, um, children are fearless, right? Like they will jump into all the things. Like it's just like sometimes you have to pump the brakes on them because it's like I don't want you to hurt yourself. So it's like let me kind of slow your roll and pull you back in because they'll jump and say, "Let me do a headstand. Let me do all the things." But unfortunately, by the time we become adults, for any number of reasons, a lot of that fearlessness and sense of adventure has sort of been tamped down or even stamped out for some of us, depending on our life experiences. So there can be a little more hesitancy to come into yoga, and with so many misperceptions here in the West about what yoga is, because there's so much of a focus on asana, there's so much of a focus on the poses. So already people are coming into it thinking, well, if I'm not super flexible, if I'm have a physical disability, if I have an injury, if I have issues around mobility, then yoga can't possibly be for me. So there are a lot of people who are just coming into yoga spaces as adults with just a lot of preconceived notions about what yoga is and their ability to do yoga. And unfortunately, sadly, for a lot of people who I talk to about yoga, it's like Yeah, I tried yoga once. I hated it. I never went back ever again. Right. And so then it's like you start probing and asking questions. It's like, well, what kind of yoga class was it? Oh, there's more than one kind of yoga. There's more than one kind of yoga. Um, so you just begin to have a conversation and invite people in to say, we can be gentle. We can do variations of poses. Like there are variations of poses, and people think there's this hierarchy that people get into about what's advanced and what's not advanced and what you should be able to do and should be striving for. And when you just can teach from a place of authenticity where it's like, we can start taking a lot of that stuff off the table, right? We just start just swiping a lot of this stuff off the table and say, if you can just get on your mat and breathe, you have the autonomy to do whatever you'd like to do in your practice. I'm just here as a yoga teacher, really as a guide to make some suggestions about what might be useful to you. But at the end of the day, it's your practice. So if all you want to do is come into this class and lay on your yoga mat or be in child's pose or sit in this one pose, there's not going to be any judgment around that. So I think the most effective thing is when we can start like taking away a lot of the judgment that comes with yoga, where it's like people feel challenge, and sometimes it's internal. It's there, no matter how many times you say it's your practice, it's like they look around the room and it's like, I still need to be keeping up with what everyone else is doing. So sometimes it's an internal dialogue, sometimes it's an external dialogue and expectations depending. But if you just use your voice to encourage and help people feel empowered to say, at the end of the day, this is your practice. You can do what you want to do in here. Like, we're not here to become robots where everybody's just doing all of the things, trying to look all the same in the poses. Because if you look around the room, everyone's body is different. So everyone's going to look different in their expression of their pose. And so once you start lighting that little spark to let people know that when you come through the door, someone's going to be here to greet you. Someone's going to be smiling. Someone's going to be here to welcome you. Someone's going to be here to ask you how your day was, how your kids are doing, whatever. Like becoming a family and becoming a community so that people are like, yeah, I want to go back to that class because I feel welcome there. It feels like a family and it gives me what I need. And the more of that you can get, the more people feel like, yeah, I can go do yoga.
Yeah. I love that you touched on the preconceived notions. And I think that that's something that a lot of teachers, especially BIPOC teachers, are hoping to overcome. I was lucky enough to be introduced to yoga from a very holistic and cultural standpoint. But the introduction was when I decided, okay, I've had this introduction, this is awesome. I decided to go into studios or classes in the park and realizing that they were so heavily asana based. It was all movement. It was sweaty. It was the core power down the street and the yoga boot camp. And now I have these two conflicting understandings of what yoga is and how I can practice. And I remember being very defeated and deflated, thinking, okay, well, this is what I learned, these 8 limbs, this using your breath, this, meditation, this slowing down, this practice at your own pace, like you were talking about, and then going into this other space that's like, this is yoga, this is how we do it, if you want to practice here. I remember going to a yoga class and taking a child's pose instead of a downward dog, and the teacher called me out, was like, I see you in that child's pose, we're not there yet. And I was like, I am, my body,
Right.
I am, and I'm like, how is it that shame is now
Mhm.
involved in a yoga class? This is crazy to
Yeah.
me. But I think it's really interesting, Kim and I are talking a lot about yoga because, that's the field that we're in and that Kim is in as a teacher. But also I think that this is relatable in any field. If you are a teacher in any field, you being a teacher that encourages your students, teaches your students, encourages your students, but then allows them to learn at their own pace, to engage at their own pace, to have those moments where maybe they're not understanding, or maybe they are having a little bit of a struggle. And that this is something I will agree with you that I see much more in adults than I see in children. as a confidence coach, one of the things that I tell most women when I work with them is go to a playground and watch any of the children. They have the confidence of 10 superheroes. They do not think twice about
Yeah.
saying what they mean, doing what they like. You see, some of them are dancing, some of them are eating dirt, some of them are, they're just like doing all because they haven't had those barriers to their confidence put in place yet. And as adult students, I think that it's really important for us to remember that a lot of the things that we are attempting to learn, whether it's yoga, whether it's dance, whether it's cooking, whether it's public speaking, whatever it is that we're learning something new. And that also comes with a lot of those barriers between our confidence or our courage. And part of learning, like going to a place to learn something, like let's say that you go to Kim and you're going to learn yoga from Kim, right? Part of our job as students is also to recognize that I may have certain barriers that make it difficult for me to accept the teaching, right? And I don't think that I really understood that from a perspective other than my own before I started coaching. I was like, wait a second, people are going to have reasons why it's not sinking in, or they have resistance, or they have fear. And I don't know about you, but I feel like part of my job as a teacher is to actually help them pinpoint that for themselves so that they can get the best benefit out of what it is that they're trying to learn.
Yeah, one of the I think that's all so well said, and I think one of the things that I really like to say in my class, and it's not original to me, but it's just like this is a practice, not a performance, right? And
Mm,
like it's okay to be wobbly. It's okay to fall out of tree pose. It's okay if you choose to keep your toes down on the floor and your foot. Like it's okay. And so once we begin to like take away all of these expectations about what our yoga practice has to look like, and to be like, you can use a block, you can use a strap, you can use a chair. So I probably talk more in my in my yoga class. Speaking of teaching to adults, I probably talk more in
yeah.
my yoga class than most teachers may. I don't know, but because it's like I want to let you know you have all these options available to you to execute it in whatever way feels right for you. So pull over that chair that's on the side of the room if that's what you feel like you need. Use a strap. Here, take this block. You don't have to be trying to do what you think yoga is supposed to be because it's what you've seen on the cover of a magazine or it's what you see on television. It's like it just needs to look like what works for you and your body, and that's going to be different for. So once you keep saying that, like you have to keep saying it, right? Um, and to let them know that you are also human. Like as yoga teachers, there's no perfection in us either. So I'm like, yeah, that was wobbly. Oh, I just did that. What if what? Oh, my bad, y'all. I said left. I meant right.
Got to breathe. Am I breathing?
Like, oh, yeah, right. Like, check myself. Okay, y'all. Yeah, so when you begin to connect in that way and maybe even bring some laughter into the yoga class where it's just like, all right, y'all, we're gonna turn over like I know I asked you to turn over before, but just imagine like rotisserie chicken. Like we just gonna roll around in here and it's like a buffet. Like take what you want, leave what you don't. Once you just keep saying that over and over again, it gives people permission and again empowers people to be like, I can do what I want to do in here. And that there shouldn't be any shame. And that's a lot of times what just constantly saying, like, just think about this without judgment, right? Because in our minds, we're always like, oh man, I didn't do that right. Oh man, I couldn't hold that pose. Oh, I came out this pose before everyone else did. But it's just like, just observe it. Like, just make a mental note and then just get back on track and just this critical voice. And so we have to pull in those principles of yoga like ahimsa, like talking about non-harm, which begins with ourselves. We think about nonviolence where it's always like, I'm not harming other people, I'm not violent towards other people or even animals. I'm a yoga teacher, so I'm vegan, I have to be all these things, but it's just like we speak to ourselves in ways that we would never speak to another human being oftentimes. And so once you encourage one to just be like, when that little critical voice comes up, and it's going to come up because it comes up for all of us, like just notice it, release it, and just keep going. Like, we don't have to like live in these spaces with these little criticisms that we're already and always giving to ourselves. So it's bringing in all of those elements of our practice to let people know it can be whatever you need it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. For those of you that have been listening to this show for a long time, you just echoed a lot of the same things that I said, the inner critics and the fear, the releasing judgment. Ooh, with the self-talk, it all starts with you. Every single thing that comes out of your mouth starts in your head. And we are the worst bullies to ourselves. I started crying when you said it's a practice, not a performance. I think that I don't, for some reason, the second you said it, I was thinking about all of the ways that I perform over practicing, the way that I do, what I'm doing, even now. And I was like, wow, you've been performing a lot, but you haven't
Yeah.
been practicing very much. And I think one of the things that's really important about that, especially for those of us who, use social media and are online a lot, either for our business, like most of my classes in my studio, they're all online, right? And so spend a lot of time in this online space, and we forget that we're real people, just in a different environment, a virtual environment. But with that comes so much of the pressure, and what we're supposed to look like, what we should be doing, how it is we should be showing up, and yeah, and then how we should not be showing up, and those kinds of things, right? um and I think that what you were talking about, when you have someone in your class and they're feeling judgment about coming out of a pose too early, or feeling shame around using their tools like a strap or a block. I think a lot of that is force fed to us from our social media, from our online spaces. And um, I just really appreciate hearing you resonate the message that your tools are there to support you. Using a block or a strap doesn't mean you're any less of a practitioner than someone who isn't using them.
Yeah.
Being able to use a chair or use a wall, or take a child's pose instead of going into that next, upward, it doesn't matter. What matters is how you feel. And I think that goes back to kind of what you were talking about with the self-talk, right? We have so many emotions around these expectations and what we should be doing. And at the same time, with that emotion, we have this like social pressure. And then at the same time, I personally, in my experience with my clients, is that they question themselves so much. Why am I not this good yet? When am I going to be this good? How long do I have to do this before I'm good? And it's like, what's good? Like you're asking, what's good? What is good?
Right.
And I think that concept of that's performative, right? That's
Mhm.
performative practicing of yoga, right? But actually practicing has the ability to make you feel in alignment, has the ability to make you feel connected, it has the ability to make you feel good about yourself. And when we start putting in all these wedges of, well, I have to use a block, so I'm not good, or I have to do that and I'm not good, or I had to take a rest, or I had to need a sip of water, and it's like, all of those things are just your body reacting to what it is that you're doing. And it almost, when I hear things like this, it's almost like you're fighting a relationship with yourself, right? Like this relationship with yourself is, you're feeding it right now. And instead of being like, I feel good about this, or I'm doing really well, or this feels good in my body, my muscles feel nice, you're like, could have been better, should have been better, like, why are you doing this? And it's like, what if you had a partner that talked to you like that? Would you stay with them? Would you? No, you wouldn't. So why do it to yourself, rather than spirit experiencing the action as togetherness with yourself.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the best things that we can do is sort of um, just be very open and honest about our own experiences, because people think, oh, well, you're a yoga teacher, so of course you're flexible. And I'm just like, y'all would think I would be more flexible. I do yoga every day, something multiple times a day. Like, sis, ain't that it still is not as flexible as you would think that I would be. Like, I still sit on a bolster in easy pose. Like, sometimes I'm like, I come to yoga with my bag that has all the things in it. It's got the straps in it. And I'm just like, I'm using a strap today. My back hurts today, or whatever. So the more that people can see that in me as someone who's maybe they're looking to as some type of authority, well, it's like, oh, well, if she's doing the things, then yeah. So it's, again, empowering people to give themselves permission to be like, I can do whatever I need to do that feels right for me.
Do you feel like that piece of honesty that you had with yourself about what it is that you need while you practice, and really being able to show that to your students, do you think that that was a part of how you started creating, your speaking voice, your teaching voice, the voice that comes out of you now when you're teaching other teachers? The reason that I ask this is because this is a question that I get a lot from my public speaking students is, I don't know where is that voice? And I think I'll let you answer. I feel like it's developed as you practice, but I'm curious if what you were just talking about was part of the development for yours.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge as a yoga teacher is being able to be your authentic self, right? To find your own voice, to figure out how you want to relate. Because I think, when we do our 200-hour training, what my experience and a lot of what I've observed is that our 200-hour training, we almost become like robots, right? We're just kind of repeating the exact way we learn, we phrase it, the way that our teacher taught us to say it. And then over time, as you get out there and you start teaching, you're like, well, why am I telling people that down dog is a resting pose? It is not, right? But you hear that in so many, and I used to say that, and I was like, this doesn't feel restful. Like, so why are we saying it's a resting pose? It doesn't feel very restful. So it's over time, like being able to give myself permission to say I can be whatever type of yoga teacher, like finding my own voice, not, it's interesting. I came into one of my classes and one of the kids one time was like, you aren't going to talk in that weird yoga voice, are you? So it's like, and now into down, and I was like, no. And I said, and if you ever feel like I start to go into that voice, like, please tap me on my shoulder and be like, okay, you're doing it. You're doing that voice that I don't want to hear. So,
Those kids, they got all the confidence in the world.
they
They're like,
don't. They
"We're
have
gonna
no
bring about voice
filters.
in
They
here, are
don't
you?"
care about
Oh
hurting
my
your feelings or saying whatever comes up. And that's the joy and challenge of teaching kids. But yeah, it's just learning to be the teacher that I want to be, and looking to other teachers who I see as role models that I can learn from, and then learning how to take that and make it my own so that I'm not looking to just become another version of this person or this type of teacher or whoever I've been learning for, but it's like to take all of these learning experiences and then to turn it into the type of experience that I want to cultivate for the people that I serve here in Birmingham. So that authenticity of, what a yoga teacher is supposed to look like or practice or, perform like or dress like even, because one of the biggest questions people get is like, what should I wear? What should I wear to yoga class? Like, why? I mean, I know why it's a question because there's a yoga uniform,
Yeah.
right?
I
But
just
I'm
stopped
just
wearing
like,
my yoga uniform. I
yeah,
just
but it's like you can wear whatever you want to wear. I said anything that you can move around comfortably in.
on. Yep.
Like wear that. You don't have to go buy $100 pair of yoga pants. You don't have to wear yoga pants at
At
all.
all.
Just wear whatever you can sit down comfortably in, move around comfortably in. So it's finding that authenticity where I just want to be able to walk into a room and maybe somebody not even be able to, like, you're the yoga teacher, right? Because there
Yeah.
is no expectation that, whatever we think a yoga teacher is supposed to look like, coming in with all my bracelets and I'm burning sage all around the room. And, I'm just like, that feels like performing for
Yeah.
me. It's not to knock anyone who chooses to do that, but it's just like, let's just create a space where people feel welcome, that people can begin to feel like this is a family, where people can feel like there's no judgment and people can have a positive experience because I don't ever want anyone to go away from my yoga class feeling awful about the experience that they just had or feeling judgmental or shamed or any of those negative emotions, but to go away like, yeah, that was good. That's
Awesome.
what I needed, you know.
I
Yeah.
truly believe that the more we as teachers can be our authentic selves, the more people feel like they have, permission that they don't need, but the permission to be their authentic selves. And so when we get into that performative space, what we're breeding is more performativeness.
Right.
Performativeness? Yeah, like just performers. We're breeding more performers, really.
Right.
And it's really the last thing that we need. You had said something about, you know, the way that we say, like getting that, yeah, that training that you got, and then kind of like reverberating it like word for word. And then you were, why am I saying this? Where is that coming from? And I like to think of this a lot like building a house. I do think that it's very important that we get the base foundation infrastructure of what it is that we're going to teach. I sometimes feel like I meet teachers or coaches, or not mentors specifically, but coaches and teachers who, as I'm listening to them, I kind of feel like they skipped over the foundational part of their education and went straight into, this is my opinion, and this is how I think, this is what I'm going to now spread as some sort of like factor. I do think it's important for us to lay the foundation of that education in the way that it's meant to be taught to us. And if we're going to take the responsibility of being teachers, we need to have that foundation. But I think, yeah, and I think that I feel like that foundation in building a house is like, the foundation, and then the piping, and then the wood that goes into the walls, right? And then you start practicing. And I feel like practicing is when you start putting up walls, and you put the roof on, and you put doors, and on the, and that practice is you being able to say, this is what I learned and how I learned it. And then you have a house, and that's super awesome, but nobody wants to live in an empty house, right?
Right.
The interior design and decoration of that house is where your authentic personality gets put in, right? You have the actual foundation, you have the education, you have the knowledge in the way that it was meant to be taught to you, and the way that you are, meant to teach it to other people, to be in integrity. But at the same time, that's why we have favorite teachers in school. I remember my third grade teacher was my favorite teacher of my entire life. And it wasn't because she stuck to the book or she kept spouting the same things that all the other third grade teachers were saying. It was because she had personality. She had caring and consideration. She made us laugh. She cracked jokes. Like, she never made us feel ashamed. She was teaching us so many different things at one time, but her personality was such a big part of that. And sometimes when I'm feeling like my personality is too big or too much, or like I need to scale it back and be a little bit more performative to, get to the next milestone in my career, whatever it is, I always think of Mrs. Bird. And I think, what would your life be like if Mrs. Bird had not been Mrs. Bird?
Yeah.
If I'm almost 40 years old, and I'm like, and then Mrs. Bird did a talent show. I'm like, I remember everything about that year. What was like 8 years old? And so, yeah, I think it's important for us to remember that who we authentically are, with our foundation, with the walls and the doors and the roof. When we go in to design our house, and we go in to design who we are as teachers and how it is that we want to connect with our students, that authenticity is a huge piece of it. And like we started this conversation at the very beginning, there are people out here looking for someone who teaches what you teach and how you teach. And so, kind of bringing it back to this part of our conversation, that fear of not being accepted as a teacher, or that, resistance to wanting to teach the way that you want to teach, I think that we as teachers now get to look at that and say, where can we do a little bit more work and practice so that we are, attracting the people that need us, and the people that we're going to be the most benefit to as teachers.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because the thing that I always have to remind myself is that as a teacher, my goal is to be able to teach to whoever's in front of me. And that's why I spend so much time taking trainings, doing continuing education, so that whoever shows up, I know how to teach that person. And I'm not telling that person, like, my go-to doesn't have to be just take child's pose until you get to the thing that you can do. No, my responsibility as a teacher is to say, okay, I've got something that I can pull out of my toolkit to offer you. If this thing that I initially suggested isn't available to you, we've got something else for you, so that you to feel engaged throughout the class that I'm teaching. But I'm not the teacher for everybody,
Yeah.
right? And there's a difference, right? So it's like, if you are looking for the vigorous power yoga where you leave in a sweaty mess, I am not a yoga teacher, right? And there's no judgment around that for me or for the person who's looking for that experience, because some people need that. And that's what I had to get to as a teacher, to say, just because this is the type of experience that I want to cultivate in my class doesn't mean that's what everyone needs or what everyone is looking for. And so have a list of other yoga teachers that you can say, oh, if that's the type of yoga experience that you're looking for, maybe try this teacher's class or maybe go to this yoga studio. They kind of focus on that because some people need that movement to discharge some energy. So that's what some people need. And we also have to accept that as yoga teachers, that as much as we love the restorative, gentle, resetting, activation of parasympathetic nervous system, that some people need to discharge some stuff. And
Yeah.
some people can have trauma around stillness and silence and sitting for long periods of time. So, but that's not the yoga class that I teach is leans towards that gentleness.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so it's finding the distinction of having the skill sets to be able to teach to whatever that person needs, but also acknowledging that some people will come to my class and won't come back because it wasn't their cup of tea. And that's okay too.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and I find it really interesting because Keisha Jordan in my last interview said the exact same thing. It's that we as leaders, we need to really be able to be honest with ourselves about when it is that we say to a student or a client or whoever it is that's coming to us saying, I would like to learn this from you. We have to get better at saying, I'm not going to be your cup of tea, baby. I'm just not. I already know. But also, I think that what you were saying actually leads to a really great point about community, right? If I'm not the teacher for you, I would like to be able to say, I know exactly what you're looking for, and that there's this class and this teacher, or I work in an online space, so my community tends to be. I can point in a lot of different directions. It's like if you want to do in person, this is where you would go to find that information, or if you want to do on, these are the people that I know, and I'm going to send you on your merry way because. I think at teachers we get so excited about like teaching other people. We want them to have the skills and the tools and the knowledge and everything, and we forget that if we are choosing to enter into a teaching relationship or coaching relationship where the learning styles or what it is that they're trying to learn is not matching up, we can actually do more damage. We're doing more damage than we are doing good, and so that is the community building piece of this. I think is so important so that we feel empowered to say, I don't think this class is for you. I may not be the teacher for you, but I do know somebody that may be more in alignment with what you're looking for. And that networking and community, I think, is really important so that we can continue to have that integrity around the students that we're teaching and how it is that we bring them into our space.
Yeah, and that's so well said. And that's where we have to check our own ego as teachers as well to say that I am okay with acknowledging the skills and
Yes.
and be able to refer people out and say this is the teacher that you need. Like I've got my lane, I know what road I want to stay on, I'm staying in that lane, and then I've got these other people, and because of social media, to not get caught up with how many people are showing up for my class, right?
Mhm.
Because it can be deflating, especially as a new yoga teacher. You like put all this effort, I'm going to come teach a yoga class, I've spent all this money, I've done all this training, and then two people show up and it's like only two people showed up. But it's like, no, two people showed up that I get to teach today, which means I can give them even more of my attention. So once we start taking some of that stuff off the table, that's telling us as teachers, like, what's my definition of success as a yoga teacher? Like that's something we really have to sit with, and um, and to say that it's not in the numbers. Like if you get a lot of people who are showing up and feel like your class is what they need, that's awesome. But not basing your confidence or your definition of success around how many people are serving, because it's just like if I can make a huge difference for these few people who show up for my class, then I'm doing my job as a yoga teacher.
Yeah. So beautiful. I actually had a teacher one time say the same thing to me. Her class usually had about 15 to 20 students in it. And I showed up to class and nobody else was there. And it was a class I went to every week. And I thought, this is weird. I don't know what's going on. And then she showed up and she was like, hi, Emma Rose. And I was like, hi, are you canceling class? And she was like, why would I cancel a class? And I was like, well, I'm the only one here. And she goes, yeah, but you're here. And I was like, That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Right, yeah, whether it's 1 or it's 100,
Yeah,
we have to be ready to do, and maybe it gives you a chance to, like, I mean, because 'cause I've had that happen,
to hone
and I'm
your
just
skills.
like, "Well, let's do something different today. I had this plan, but let's try this." Like, it gives you an opportunity to maybe do some things that you wouldn't do, and if that person is open, then they're like, "Sure, let's do it," you know? So, yeah,
Being
it's
open, I think, is important, and I like that you're bringing up the concept of these vanity metrics, right? We put value on metrics that almost don't even mean anything. Like what, like we have it in our head that, like, 15 is better than 2, and then you go, why?
right.
Like what does that
Or
mean? Like,
handstands are better than easy pose,
why?
right? Why?
Yeah,
What
who
what
that?
does advance even mean?
I'm all about, I actually do think that I want to do a show about, inclusive language in teaching, because I'm learning so much. I think that it was something I just very naturally did with children, like, bringing the vocabulary down to what they would understand, or slowing my tone, my pace down, or lowering my tone, that kind of thing. But I think that inclusive language is really, I'm very fascinated by it, just because I feel like it's a topic that, I mean, when I was younger, that wasn't even a concept that we ever talked about at all. There was a language, and if you didn't like it, sucks for you, kind of thing.
Yeah, there was one mold, and if you didn't fit it, something was wrong with you,
Yeah.
But thankfully, there are a lot of teachers and a lot of training opportunities that there's no reason as a yoga teacher that you shouldn't have some tools in your toolkit about how to be inclusive, how to teach an inclusive yoga class, regardless of what type of yoga you're teaching. Because there's more than one way to do it. And so
Yeah.
there's some really good resources. Accessible Yoga. I'm an Accessible Yoga ambassador with Accessible Yoga Association. Jivana Heyman and the board members and the teachers that they bring in. That's all they do is do training around how to make training inclusive and accessible, and to teach to the person who's in front of you. And as we age, I'll speak for myself. As I age, I realize more and more the importance of that. My practice today doesn't look like it did 10 years ago. And I imagine that 10 years from now, it's not gonna look like it does today. And that's all the more reason that we have to keep lifting up these other aspects of the practice that are not asana focused.
Mhm.
Because if we are blessed to live a long life, by nature of aging, we're not going to be able to do all the things in terms of a physical practice. But we can always sit, we can always meditate, we can always focus on our breath. Those things are always available to us, regardless of our age, unless we're challenged with some type of cognitive decline.
Yeah.
And other than that, those aspects of our practice, so the more that we can focus on cultivating, like I always tell my kids, like it's like a pizza, right? There's 8 limb passes, 8 slices of pizza. The poses are just one slice. If you give away one slice or eat a slice, you still got a lot of pizza left, right? So yeah, let's look at that. So I'm always trying to weave all of these approaches to teaching into the conversation, where I even had a little talk with the doctor that I saw. I was referred out to see a specialist for an issue I was having, and the doctor was in a booth, and she was like rushing around from room to room. And of course, everywhere I go, we get to talking about yoga. And she was like, yeah, I wish I had time for yoga. And I was like, you do have time for yoga.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't have to go to a yoga. If you're defining yoga as going to a yoga class, maybe you don't have time for yoga. But I was like, but if you define yoga as going in your office and sitting in your chair and closing your door for 5 minutes and relaxing your shoulders and focusing on your breath and closing your eyes, maybe you do have
Yeah.
time for yoga. She was like, yeah, I guess you're right. So, even as we're looking to the medical community that thankfully is now recognizing the importance of managing stress, as we talk about teaching to adults, stress is at an all-time high, a pandemic, all the things that we're coping with. People are seeing doctors, therapists, for any number of reasons. And so now you have more doctors, thankfully, that are beginning to say, hey, I recommend that you go take a yoga class. But that's like scratching the surface, right? So then that person that says, okay, my doctor told me to go take a yoga class, let me go look at the local yoga studio, and it's Ashtanga or Power, and I go sign up for that class. Now I can't keep up. Now I'm sweating. Now I'm embarrassed. I'm never going back to that class. So we've got to try to educate everyone and help inform everyone that there are different types of yoga, to understand that it can be all of these other things other than just the physical part of the practice, and then make that available in our community so that people can actually find us if that's what they need.
Yeah. I loved that story about the story you just told about the doctor, because it's such a beautiful example of you using your voice to, bust a belief. That doctor believed that she did not have time to do yoga, and you spoke up. You said, if you think that yoga is going to a studio, maybe you don't. But what about this alternative? What about that? And that, to me, is really, these little moments are really, to me, powerhouse moments. Being able to get in front of a class of 20 students, or being able to like speak at a retreat or a summit or something, these are really amazing, powerful ways to use your voice. But I think that these little moments, these little opportunities where we take the time to say something to someone that maybe they won't be receptive to, or maybe they're going to look at you like, what do you mean sitting in my office is yoga? Like, being able to respond to her like that, to me, was a powerhouse using your voice moment. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I think that the more we take the little opportunities, the more that they add up over time. And yes, getting on stage and speaking at a retreat can be very impactful, but I guarantee you, she's never going to forget what you just said. And if you say
Yeah,
it on stage
it's
somewhere, it
always,
might have just gone right over her head.
yeah, it's being an ambassador for yoga, right? It's having taking every little opportunity wherever you are, whatever circumstance you find yourself in. I did the same thing with some nurses, and she was just like, wow, I'm not even normally on this side of the unit today, but I guess it was meant to be here so I could have this conversation, and I need to come to your class, and my daughter needs to come to your class. Or just any the server in the restaurant that we were in the other night is pregnant, and we were like, do you have a doula? This young Black woman was like, do you have a doula? We just got all in our business, and luckily we had established a good rapport from her coming to the table and things. And I was like, have you ever considered prenatal yoga? And like, even, did some virtual one-on-one sessions with her just to give her an introduction. So it's like always taking every opportunity to talk about yoga, to change people's minds about yoga, to let people know that yoga is available. And then I think the most important part is creating opportunities to create access. So in my other professional life for the last 16 years, I've been an entrepreneur. I own my own consulting company doing fundraising, primarily grant writing, working with clients all over the country. So I've been marrying those two skill sets of saying, I want people to have this experience with yoga, but maybe not maybe, some people can't afford yoga, or some people aren't ready to spend their discretionary income on yoga because they haven't decided that that's a priority yet.
Right.
Because they haven't seen the value in it to feel like that's something that they want to take their discretionary income and pay for. So it's like, how do we create these opportunities to um, make yoga low cost or no cost, that removes that as an excuse, that not that, well, I want to take a yoga class, but I can't afford a yoga class. So now it's another barrier that's out of the way. So I prioritize teaching classes that other people are paying for, so that the people who come to my classes can come at no cost. So the class that I teach on Wednesday nights at the local rec center is a donational option. It's a donation optional class.
Mhm.
So if you want to drop something in the bucket, fine. There's no pressure. It's free if you don't want to pay a thing. But I've received support earlier this year, back in June, as a member of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. I received an
So
award.
exciting.
Yeah, it was a finalist for their SEVA award. And so it's in partnership with the Give Back Yoga Foundation. I received a monetary award that helped to keep yoga accessible. We've received yoga mats. So it's like all the reasons that you might have where it's like, I don't have a yoga mat, or I can't afford to come. Like, we're just removing the barriers to access. And so I kind of use that as my mantra as I teach yoga classes, as removing the barriers to access to yoga, to keep it free, to keep it in spaces that people don't have anxiety around or stigma around. So by putting it in the library, in the park, in the rec center, it's places where people already are. And, it's like if all I have to do is show up, now I don't have a whole lot of reasons not to try.
Yeah. Making it easy, yes. To say, okay, if all I gotta do is show up, yes.
So people are like, "Oh, it's free. I don't have to pay." Okay,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, so and there can be challenges around that because sometimes when you make things free, sometimes people value it less, because the BIPOC restorative yoga we received a grant to teach that during the pandemic, and we had to keep it very small because we were still trying to do social distancing in the space. And we had just have this many slots and you can sign up and it's free, but just register. But then we get to class and then people didn't show up, and so it's like sometimes, so we in that case we had to change the policy where we put a little deposit in place where
Yeah.
it's like pay a little deposit. If you show up, the class is still free. You haven't lost a thing. But if you don't show up, we're going to keep that little deposit and reinvest
Get
it in
back.
this class going. So at least it makes people think, do I really want to come to this class?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've
There's
had
so
to
many
do little
different
things
ways to
like,
do it too.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's lots of creative ways, sliding scales,
Yeah.
scholarship, people are doing all kinds of creative things, community classes that are free in a studio on weekends or a certain time of the month. There's lots of things. There's no one right way to do it, but it's acknowledging that cost can be a barrier, and if we remove that, then it's an easier way to get to yes.
Where can people find you on the interwebs? I would love to be able to get them connected with you.
Yeah, the best place to find me right now is on Instagram, and my Instagram is yes you yoga underscore wellness, so YESYOU yoga underscore wellness. I started Yes You Yoga and Wellness LLC because I went on sabbatical. I'm supposedly on sabbatical, so as of last December, I decided to take time off from my business and like just focus on my passions. So
Yeah.
that's when I established my officially established my LLC with Yes You Yoga and Wellness. So I'm still building out the website and like formalizing it because I had just kind of been teaching it on the side, right? And in addition to my real business as a consultant. But as I've spent the last several months figuring that I love teaching yoga, I love having these conversations, facilitating these conversations around wellness. I mean, I'm trained as a doula. I'm trained training as an herbalist. I'm a beekeeper. So it's like all these ways to enter into these conversations around, how we can, especially address health disparities within the African American community and other communities of color. Um, to say there's, I'm a big ambassador for sleep. Uh,
Oh,
getting
that's a whole nother
sleep.
topic. Oh
I
my
know,
gosh.
doing a whole session on that and just doing better myself because I
Yeah.
used to be one of those people who prided myself on sleeping 4 hours a night and burning the midnight oil and meeting my
Right.
deadlines and doing my work.
Why are
But
we
now
so
I'm
proud
like,
of that?
yeah, I don't
Why
know
are we
why,
so proud of
but I'm
that?
like, no, I'm going to bed.
I'm getting some rest.
Yeah, so the little things we can do can go such a long way because diet is great, exercise and movement is great, all of those things. Nutrition is important, but I don't think there's enough conversation happening around good quality sleep and stress management.
And I
Um,
think also
because
there's
we
not enough
have it. Yeah.
conversations around all of those things when it comes to adults, the different kinds
Yes.
of adults that are out here. I think we try to nip it in the bud by teaching it in elementary school and high school and college. And then for those of us who are just out here living, it gets harder to remember. Especially for those like you and I just said, I used to pride myself on getting 4 hours of sleep, and I thought that was something that I should wear as a badge of honor, not realizing that I was really doing harm to my mind and my body and my energy and my spirit. And so I think there's a lot of the things that we learn as we're growing that don't benefit us, but we hold tight to them. And
Mhm.
learning new ways and learning new things can feel weird, and we can have resistance, and we can even fear what it means to change. I have that conversation all the time. What happens when I have a more confident voice, or I start doing exercise and my family starts making fun of me, or how do I deal with that? And it's like, these are all really great things to be talking about. And as adults, there's just not enough support around those conversations, which is part of the reason that you and I are here right now having this conversation.
And we have to amplify each other's voices. And so that's why I so appreciate this opportunity to be on your podcast and have this conversation with you and to share my thoughts around, so many parts of this conversation and these issues and the things that we're witnessing. Because I really believe that healing happens in community, right? There's like a lot of things that we can do individually, of course, to support ourselves, to support our health and wellness. But we always have to remember that so much healing happens in community. So whether it's in your church, your spiritual community, your group of girlfriends, your family, whoever it is, the more that we can come together to like bear witness to each other, to support each other, all of those things, the more healing can happen. And that's why what we do, whether it's virtually, in person, in our local communities, it matters. It matters because it gives people spaces where it's like, here's where I can come to do this work that I need to do whatever it is that I need
Everything
to
else
do.
I got to do every day. Oh, Kim, well, I'm so grateful to now have you as part of my community. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on. And yeah, I'm going to put the links to Kim's social media in the notes of the show here. I'm also going to ask her for a link to the accessibility organization that she mentioned earlier in the show. I think that that's probably a really good one, not just for yoga teachers, but I'm sure the encouragement for more accessibility, more accessible language is probably something all teachers everywhere could use. One of the things I wanted to end it on here, Kim, while I still have you here, is I love how you, at the very end, you were talking about how you're an ambassador for what it is that you love, for yoga, what it is that you love to do. And I think for teachers teaching other adults, that's really important, because we as adults want to see people passionate about what they're running their mouth about. There are so many people out here that just talk, to have opinions, to argue, to want to fight, to all these things, that my way is right, your way is wrong. And when you meet people like Kim who are so passionate about what it is that they're doing, that they want to be an ambassador for what it is that they're teaching, those are the kinds of teachers you want to find. Those are the ones. If you're in Birmingham, please look Kim up. I'm so grateful to know you now. And yeah, I said it before, but thank you again for being on.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I'm glad to have you in my circle. If I'm ever down your way, I will definitely reach out to connect, and just look forward to staying in communication, going forward. And thank you for
Yeah.
all that you do, from hosting this podcast, to the coaching, to being the ambassador within the organization that you work with. And it's great that they have that initiative to
Yeah.
focus on that BIPOC effort. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Vibrant Voice. I will be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode with you. Until then, remember, it's practicing, not performance. I love it. Bye.